Okay, so I'm not going to be the first person to point out that people who live in completely car-dependent places all over the US will pay thousands of dollars to go on vacation to a Disney resort and walk around a fake old-timey Main Street. But I also find that completely reductive. With Disney, there's a much more complex dynamic at play, and today I want to dig into it. Because what I think is really interesting about the original Disney park in Anaheim is the contrast between what it's like inside the resort and what's going on outside. Because Disney World in Florida is basically 40 square miles of self-contained city where you can stay immersed in the experience for your whole trip. But Anaheim, it's 2 theme parks, Disneyland and California Adventure, and a couple hotels and a few shops that fit on about 2/3 of a square mile. That means basically as soon as you leave the park, the spell is broken and you have to deal with what Anaheim, California actually is. So I wanted to contrast the way things are inside Disneyland in particular with the way things are just outside the park on your walk back to your hotel. Some of this is low-hanging fruit, like what retail storefronts look like inside Disney and what they look like just across the street. Or the fact that everything outside the park is scaled for maximum legibility for people driving by at 40 miles per hour. While on Main Street, USA, the buildings are designed to be maximally pleasing to someone on foot, with the upper stories scaled at 5/8 size to give the whole street a more intimate feel. So Disney has a charming Main Street, Anaheim has charmless Stroads. None of this was lost on Walt Disney himself, who apparently couldn't stand the tawdriness of the development that sprouted up just outside the park, which he had no control over, and it's really the whole reason Disney started buying up land in Florida in the 60s and ultimately opened Disney World in 1971. Because, as we're going to see, the magic of Disney, in as much as it exists, consists in a very tightly controlled environment. It's clean, it's incredibly well organized, the logistics are A+. You are gonna see and experience what Disney wants you to see and experience, and you're gonna pay $200 for the privilege. Now, one completely reasonable question you might ask at this point is this fascism? Well, funny you should ask. So one thing I wanted to do while I was here was walk the whole perimeter of the Disney property so I could get some footage that would help me talk about how people access the park. Transit, parking, all the logistics of how they get 1 or 200,000 people in and out of the park every day. It was basically the first thing I did once I got settled in Anaheim, since I wasn't going to the park until the next day. And I wasn't 5 minutes into filming when I was approached by 2 members of the Disney security team while I was waiting for a monorail to pass overhead so I could get a cool shot. They had questions. "Excuse me, you mind if I ask what you're taking pictures of?" Which I thought was kind of obvious, but I said, yeah, I'm just trying to get a shot of the monorail because I'm kind of a train nerd. And they basically said, well, you're gonna have to come up with a better story than that because we've got you on camera taking video of like parking garages and traffic signals. It doesn't look normal, so we have to ask questions. Also, can you produce some identification? Which I'm pretty sure I don't have to do, but I actually keep business cards on me for exactly this purpose. And when I explained I'm a YouTuber who makes videos about traffic and transit and walkability, the tone of the conversation changed immediately. They were like, "Oh, perfect, you're good. Just take all the pictures you want." And I said, well, I'm actually gonna be here for a couple days filming, including inside the park, and I like to take lots of not very normal pictures. Is there anything I should be doing differently so I can avoid any more run-ins with security? And the guy almost winked at me and basically said, no, nobody's gonna approach you the rest of your trip. Enjoy your visit, and they walked away. So number one, I don't know if I'd call it fascism, but it's definitely a surveillance state. And 2, I actually didn't believe them at all. And I spent the whole next day at Disneyland as a lone wolf, middle-aged dude, taking pictures of the most random things possible. And you know what? I was not approached once. So I'm pretty sure all my biometrics are in the database now, so if I go to Orlando next year, I don't expect any hassles. Which, I don't know how you all feel about issues around the trade-off between privacy and security. Maybe it doesn't even register for some of us anymore, but in my opinion, being a middle-aged dude who buys a solo ticket to Disneyland is already reason enough to be flagged as a suspicious character, let alone a middle-aged guy who takes photos of light fixtures. On the other hand, here are some reasons why going to Disney by yourself as a middle-aged dude is not creepy at all, but actually extremely fun. First of all, you can do exactly what you want all day long. No negotiating with other members of your party about which rides to go on, what food to eat, which characters to do photo ops with. 2, you can do everything at your own pace. If I want to stop and take pictures of thematically appropriate garbage cans, then that is exactly what I'm going to do. There are other things, but probably most important, the single rider line at Space Mountain saves you at least half an hour, and you get to sit next to random terrified people. I really was interested in what I'd call the urbanism of Disneyland. Not just Main Street USA, which is the most obvious example, but New Orleans Square, where Pirates of the Caribbean and the Haunted Mansion are, Adventureland, where Indiana Jones and the Jungle Cruise are, and definitely the new Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. These are all beautifully designed pedestrian environments, designed to funnel you into shops and restaurants and get you to spend more money, if we're being uncharitable. But at the bottom of it, they're designed to make you feel good, like you're in the happiest place on Earth. And a common denominator, it goes without saying, no cars. So the cliche thing to say here is people will pay $200 to come experience the kind of smart, walkable, mixed-use urbanism that's maybe not illegal, but probably the diametric opposite of what exists wherever they're visiting from. And there might be some truth to that, but let's be real. People don't come to Disneyland to hang out on Main Street USA. Main Street is like the gift shop you're forced to exit through on your way out of the museum, or it's the place you rush through when you get here so you can be at the Central Plaza by 8 a.m. when they do the rope drop and open all the attractions. I just think the whole dynamic is a lot more complex and interesting. Like outside of Disneyland, it feels like an eternity if you have to wait like 2 minutes to get a walk signal at one of these miserable intersections, and then be subjected to a 36-second pedestrian countdown because you have to cross like 10 lanes of traffic. But inside of Disney, you'll happily wait in a standby line for Star Wars Rise of the Resistance that's over an hour long. And part of that is anticipation, but part of it is how much effort and attention to detail Disney puts into making the queuing areas part of the experience itself. A lot of it is just basic good urban design, and also the ride is kind of phenomenal. I had to go on it twice just to figure out how Disney pulled the whole thing off. It isn't just the attractions either, though. There's a whole attention to detail in the way the environment is designed. Disney wants to immerse you in a whole fantasy universe that takes you completely out of the headspace you're normally in your day-to-day life, even when they're selling you Coca-Cola products. To be fair, you can buy traditional beverages of the planet Tatooine. I went with the green with red lichen patty frog eggs. I think it was a good choice. Is Star Wars Galaxy's Edge a fascist state? Probably not, but I did find myself wondering if half our country's problems would be solved if we just gathered up all the chuds who fantasize about being masked immigration agents and just gave them cast member jobs like Imperial Lieutenant or Stormtrooper instead. Then they could still cosplay as the fascists they want to be, but spend their time hassling 8-year-old white kids instead of whatever it is they're actually doing. Okay, if you haven't picked up on it by now, I am actually a fan of what Disney does. And I do think there's some merit to the idea that people pay a lot of money to come here because it is the walkable, car-free environment they don't have at home. But in a minute, I'm gonna get to one glaring exception. First, usual reminder to click on all the various screen elements. The bell really is the most important one. Also, usual ways to stay apprised of channel activities. I am coming to Edmonton, Alberta on July 17th. I've been to Calgary before, but Edmonton is going to be new for me, so I'm excited. Also, I'll go ahead and announce this now. Seattle, Wednesday, November 5th, live event with The War on Cars as part of their upcoming book tour. We actually had so much fun when we did an event together in New York earlier this year, and the tickets went fast. So anyway, I'm going to open up a pre-sale on my Patreon in the next couple weeks. So if you're interested in coming out, that's going to be the best way to make sure you get tickets. Okay, so I don't want to overplay this dichotomy between what's inside Disneyland and what's just outside the gates. Like, you can go to walkable downtown Disney, which is on Disney property, but not inside the theme parks, for free. And I don't know, buy some urbanist Legos. Or even off Disney property, the convention center, which is actually what I was in Anaheim for, is largely a walkable, car-free environment. The Anaheim Garden Walk, basically a compact suburban lifestyle center with all the important amenities. And the city has done about as well as they can do with the pedestrian environment on Catella Avenue. But still, at some point you have to cross Catella or Harbor Boulevard. It's pretty dehumanizing, and all it really does is make you long to be back in the warm embrace of the theme park's controlled environment. So right here, I wanted to say an obvious seeming thing that sounds true, which is that the real reason Disney is the happiest place on earth is because there aren't any cars. But this, unfortunately, turns out to not be exactly true. Welcome to Autotopia, an unfortunate portmanteau of the words automobile and utopia. It's been around since the park opened in 1955, which is really the only time you could be forgiven for thinking cars were part of any possible version of utopia. And the attraction feels old and not in a good way. The queuing area is unpleasant, it's noisy, it gets really hot in the middle of the day, and while you're waiting in line, you can't help being reminded what bad technology cars are. Like, it only takes a few seconds of observation to notice that the Disneyland Railroad, even though it's an archaic 3-foot narrow gauge heritage line, has just a massive throughput advantage over single occupant vehicles. I'm just surprised with all the cerebral horsepower Disney has in the Imagineering department, they just haven't figured this out yet. And then the ride itself, the concept is there's a rail in the middle of the track, but as a driver, you have to subtly adjust the steering mechanism in order not to grind against the rail and look like an idiot. Really thrilling stuff, and the whole concept of the ride just defeats the entire purpose of fixed guideway technology. I mean, the monorail is right there, you guys. It isn't 1955. We solved this already. And unfortunately, it just gets worse. Not only do you wait for half an hour in the sun just for the privilege of steering a motorized vehicle that's on a rail, but there's a good chance you'll end up in congestion. Credit for realism, I guess. But you know that feeling when you're in a traffic jam and the lane next to you is moving and you can't get over? Well, this is like the worst version of that, and you stood in line for it. Also, the only attraction I could pinpoint as being propped up by a specific sponsor. You guys, I paid $200 to come to Disneyland to get away from cars, and my reward is to be subject to car advertising. Even more galling, Autotopia is part of Tomorrowland. I'm sure there's a time when cars seemed cool and futuristic, but we're over a century on, and now they just seem like bad technology that ends up killing us, like lead paint or asbestos or Skynet. And man, it takes up a lot of real estate. Disney, I think it's time to move on, and don't worry, Honda will be fine, I promise. And that's all I've got. Thanks for joining today, and thanks as always to the patrons whose direct support gives me the freedom to just change it up from week to week. I don't know about you all, but it keeps me entertained. Anyway, keep the great topic suggestions coming. I'll be back with a new episode next week, and I'll see you then.